Hello, everybody. Nate Foy here, Fox News correspondent outside the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, New York. This is where Nicolás Maduro is being held. It's quite a large facility. It holds 1,600 inmates and some high-profile inmates. This is where Luigi Mangione was held, Ghislaine Maxwell, and it is not supposed to be too comfortable in there. There have been reports of violence over the years and not necessarily comfortable conditions. So, what a change the last week has brought for Maduro, who on Saturday morning, in the early morning hours of Saturday, was at home in Venezuela, in Caracas, when a U.S. military operation extracted him and his wife, Celia Flores. We're learning today that the Venezuelan military says that 24 security officers were killed in that operation. Zero Americans were killed. We have some armed guards patrolling outside of the jail right now. There's a decent military presence, or pardon me, there's a decent media presence. We're not seeing any protesters like we did throughout the weekend. There were about 100 protesters on Sunday. We saw protesters outside Maduro's arraignment yesterday on both sides of the issue. But today it's pretty quiet, as this is where he will be until his next court appearance coming up in March. In the meantime, as he awaits his next court appearance in a jail cell here in Brooklyn, he's beefing up his legal team. He hired another lawyer today, a guy by the name of Bruce Fine. He's a former DOJ and FCC lawyer. And he had quite an interesting arraignment yesterday where multiple times uh, in the arraignment, he said that he is still the president of Venezuela. And at one point, the judge had to cut him off when he was asking Maduro to identify himself. Maduro said that he was a kidnapped president and was taken from his home, started going into his story of how he got there. And the judge said that he will have his moment in court to address how this has all played out, and kind of depends on what his defense will be. But that time in court will come, and at that moment, he just needed him to identify himself, which he eventually did. There was another interesting moment at the very end of the arraignment where a man stood up and in Spanish said to Maduro that he will pay for his crimes, to which Maduro said that he is a kidnapped president once more, and then he called himself a prisoner of war. So, yeah, Maduro was taking notes throughout. His body language was somewhat neutral. He was reportedly grasping onto the handle on his seat, but his face was, not showing too much emotions. He seemed to be a bit more into it, a bit more forceful in his defense of his innocence rather than his wife, Celia Flores. Both of them charged with drug trafficking and weapons offenses. They pleaded not guilty. The lawyers for each of them did not seek bail, but indicated that they would at a later date. So where we stand right now is the next court appearance is March 17th. Until then, Maduro will be here at the MDC in Brooklyn. Uh, Something that is pretty interesting is that there's another inmate here who could end up being a star witness in the government's case against Maduro. So this is a former ally, a former head of Venezuela's military intelligence. His name is Hugo Carvajal, and he recently, back in June, pleaded guilty to essentially the same charges as part of the initial 2020 indictment against Maduro. And he faces the possibility of life in prison. Now, these two men have an interesting past. This guy, Carvajal, was very close with former Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez and initially served faithfully under Maduro. But then the two men had a break as Venezuela's economy was collapsing. Carvajal supported Maduro's opponent, a guy by the name of Juan Guaido. And then Maduro accused him of treason, kicked him out of the military. And at that point, Carvajal left the country, eventually was arrested in Spain, and then extradited to the United States, where he went on trial in 2023 and recently pled guilty to drug trafficking and weapons offenses as part of the same indictment that Maduro was initially charged in. So he's supposed to be sentenced next month, and it would make sense that he would end up being a key witness here to, in his view, potentially get some years knocked off his sentence if he's a cooperating witness and testifying against Maduro. But yeah, just obviously there's a whole lot going on at the White House in Washington D.C. and around the entire world as the United States is taking a very hands-on approach with what happens next in Venezuela and American oil companies rebuilding the infrastructure in Venezuela and how that's all going to look, and then the impacts on the countries that typically buy Venezuelan oil. Uh, a lot of shakeups geopolitically as a result of this, and there's all the reactions on Capitol Hill about whether or not what the Trump administration did or how they did it was correct or not. But what we're focusing on right now is Maduro here in New York and his upcoming trial. There's questions about what his defense will be. You look at the previous president of Panama who uh, tried to argue during a trial of drug trafficking charges that he was immune as a president of a country, which generally is the international law standard. But it didn't work in his case. And a lot of legal experts say that that won't work for Maduro, considering the United States doesn't consider him the lawful president of Venezuela, that he was an illegitimate dictator who defied the results of not one but two presidential elections. So a lot of legal experts think that that won't work for Maduro. And if you go through the 25-page indictment, there are a lot of specifics about the scale at which Maduro worked with narco terrorists to import cocaine into the United States, moving the cocaine from the producers in Colombia, then to Venezuela, and then eventually mostly to Central America, and then eventually the United States after that, working with groups like Tren de Aragua, which you've heard President Trump speak extensively about with the Tren de Aragua problem that has arisen specifically here in New York. And, Trump has said that one of the main issues he had with Maduro was that Venezuela emptied out their prisons and sent a lot of criminals to the United States under the Biden administration when the border was essentially wide open. And then we've seen the ramifications of that. But in that 25-page indictment, um, Maduro is accused of providing diplomatic cover for private flights as the foreign minister of Venezuela before he became the president, and then also selling diplomatic passports to drug traffickers. His wife is accused of accepting bribes to facilitate meetings with drug traffickers, and both of them are accused of kidnapping and murdering those who threatened their drug empire. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting case. We saw UN Ambassador Mike Waltz say yesterday that all of this is going to be played out openly in the U.S. courts. The 25-page indictment is public. You can read it if you'd like. But it appears that the U.S. has a very strong case against Maduro, and it also seems with Hugo Carvajal, the inmate here, the former spy chief of Venezuela under the days of Hugo Chavez, that they have all the witnesses that they need as well. So, not looking good for Nicolás Maduro right now as he is in federal custody in Brooklyn. But we'll see how this case plays out. And his lawyers did say that they plan to seek bail at another hearing, perhaps coming up on March 17th. So we'll be here at Fox News Channel, specifically in the New York Bureau, covering all of it. I'm not sure where my producer went. I'm not sure how to read any of your guys' questions. So, hey, Jen, does anybody have questions? No? Okay. Um, I'm told you guys don't have questions. So, in that case, give you one more look at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. We got some media here from all over the world. Ooh, it actually looks like we do have a little bit of protesters. They just got here. We'll take a walk down and we'll show you guys. I don't know how to flip this thing. Hold on. I think there we go. All right, so we're outside the federal jail. We've got a reporter doing a live shot there. Got some protesters with Venezuelan flags down here. Another cold day in New York. Not quite as cold as yesterday, where again, we did see hundreds of protesters on both sides of this issue outside the courthouse yesterday. You can see that the NYPD has put a spot here. They've cornered off an area for the protesters to make their voices heard. Let's see what side of this these protesters are on. We got one sign here that says "Free Nicolás Maduro" and Celia Flores now. Free President Nicolás Maduro. So yeah, these people are against the U.S. extraction of Maduro and Flores. It happened early Saturday morning in Caracas, Venezuela. We're talking about the U.S. plans to rebuild the oil infrastructure within Venezuela. USA hands off Venezuela. Another sign right here. But you can see not too many protesters here. It looks like about a dozen or so. Far fewer than what we've seen over the weekend or outside the courthouse yesterday. Um, yeah, that's the latest here from the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. We will continue following this story. Thank you guys for tuning in. Maybe next time we'll have more questions. This is Nate Foy, Fox News correspondent, reporting live from Brooklyn. We'll see you guys.